Hello, everyone.
Hello.
It's great to see everyone. I like this. Not often, and everyone on Zoom too, not often do I get a chance to be with so many people during a talk. On Zoom, usually it's very populated, but in person, I've been missing that. So it's really good to see. It's funny how when preparing for something like this, that you kind of get focused on something, and I was focused on this thing that I encountered and a translation of it, and I thought, oh man, this is going to be a good talk. This will be a good talk. And as I worked on it, what's funny is that something else kept jumping up to the top of the queue, like, this is important, this is important, this is important. And so it's funny how focusing on one thing can really bring you around to something very different, but very important, something that's speaking to you. And so with some conversations that I've had and some things that are just keep coming up for me, I thought that I would brush off kind of an old talk, but I want to talk about it all anew, because for me, what I want to talk about is our women Buddhist ancestors. And why? Why do I want to talk about that? Looking in the room, I see that I identify as a male, and I see people that may identify as a male outnumbering people that may identify as female a great deal. And in Zen, this is not uncommon. And because of this, I feel that the voices and the teachings that have come down through to us through the ages and that are present now today are not heard that often. So yeah, I identify as a male. I identify as several other categories of person that have other statuses and other privileges that I'm not going to cover tonight. Being white, being heterosexual, being well off, those kinds of things. They all play in together, but I don't want to, I really want to focus on the women and the teaching, because the teaching that I've encountered is different. It's different than the first Zen teachings, and as I study more, it's different than the teachings that I find that have been passed down from lineage to lineage to lineage in the male line. And if you come on Saturday is our formal service. We have a big long service. It's a lot of bowing and chanting, a lot of it, we do some acknowledgement of karma, which is good because we have a lot of karma. And we also chant a long list of male ancestors. And for the past 15 years, we've also chanted a list of female ancestors. There are some differences of these lists. One is that this list of female ancestors has just come to us in our lifetime. Buddhism has been around for 2,500 years, and just in the last 15 to 20 years, a group of American Zen practitioners thought it would be a good idea to have a list of female ancestors. They were just totally left out. What are we thinking? So we have So we chant the male ancestors and we chant the female ancestors. The male ancestors one is supposedly student to teacher, student to teacher. We know that some of that's mythical, and that's fine. It was likely instituted by the Chinese in a way to prove some kind of authenticity. We need authentic transmission from student to teacher in order to be valid Zen people. I don't know. I wrestle with that a lot. And the women's list is women that we've heard about through the sutras, some of them, and through their own teachings, and through how they've influenced Zen and influenced the world. If you do a lot of koan practice, you'll see that women are often unnamed, and they're often used as the foil or as the wise person to a foolish man. Okay, we need to take all that into account, but not naming them is a great disservice. And so this list of names is really, really important, because these people, some of them also are mythical, but a lot of these people actually lived, actually had a life and made a difference, and taught and lived and sacrificed to practice. You might be able to tell that it's hard for me to talk dispassionately about this. I get a little worked up about it. And I think that's okay. I think that's okay. What that does is it tells me that this is important to me. But I don't want to focus this talk around me and my preferences. What I want to do is kind of call to the front some teachings and some wisdom and some insight and some people that have taught us how to live this Zen life. And I say Zen, I kind of use Zen and Buddhism kind of interchangeably. I probably shouldn't, but I do. Take that. So I do have, in the book we just have a list, but I also have some great documents of, I guess I don't. Maybe I can show them to you later, more in the flow of things, of representations of these lists. The list that we have in our chant books is a little, it's shorter than a full list that is on some of these wonderful documents that we have. And if we, when we take Jukai, what we do here at MZMC is you get the male document lineage papers and the women lineage papers with your name on them, because they're our ancestors. They're part of our karma. So some questions have come up to me around what's going on. How is it that tradition that teaches non-duality and that teaches awakening and teaches oneness and teaches equanimity has such a disparity in practice with the genders? This doesn't make sense to me. Because doesn't this, whatever this is, this happening that's happening right now, this thusness, include all beings everywhere at all time? How is somebody left out? Why do we do this? And there's a lot of, there's a lot of excuses. But I think there's a lot of habit that goes into this. And for me, as a male person, talking about this is my way of working with that habit and my way of breaking some habits. So as I was saying about these women ancestors, there's not a lot of information about each and every one. There's not a lot of history. There's not a lot of teachings. There's not that student to teacher thing going on, and there's not a lot of that. But we have some notable women that are mentioned in some of the sutras and mentioned in their own schools that they taught or temples that they taught at. And we have them from the time of the Buddha through China, some Japanese women, and we don't have any on the list of our list that we chant, but there are a list of American women and women in the West that have been very instrumental in shaping what I'm calling American Zen, or what we're kind of doing here, sitting here right now. But there's women that founded orders, women that had male students, women that were taught by men, women that just went into seclusion. They started temples, they ordained and went back to their family. They had lives, they had husbands, they had children. Maybe they lost children or their lives and came back to the monastery. There are women that did some tremendous things in order to practice. People that were not allowed to come to the monastery because they were too beautiful, so they burned themselves, they scarred their bodies to practice. I walk a half a mile over here and I walk in a door. I mean, there's no comparison to this. And I'm outraged and I'm really sad. But I'm also really inspired by the persistence of practice, the persistence in the face of extreme judgment and patriarchy, and that they would keep showing up, keep showing up, keep showing up. This is inspiring. So I picked out a few women to talk about, but I also have a few examples of things here, resources that we don't always get to see. And I don't have them all, but I thought this was a good start. And I'll go through some of these in a little bit. Some of these are about Buddhist women, some of these are by Buddhist women, some of them are by ones that are living today. And some of them are about poems or koans or curated collections like that. And so these teachings, they're not lost, but they're not emphasized. And I would like to see a little more emphasis about that. And one of the reasons is when I go through these teachings and I look at them, I find a lived compassion that I only hear talked about in what I'll call male teachings. I see stories of loss, stories of showing up, stories of love. Love is not something that we talk a lot about in Zen, but like love, romantic love, and love of one person for another. And again, these are inspiring to me. because these are lived, I see them as lived compassion. Not that just compassion exists, but this is how it's done. I need that. So the first woman on the list that we have is Mahapajapati. Mahapajapati was the historical Buddha's aunt, depending where you're from, and the historical Buddha's mother died shortly after childbirth, and Mahapajapati raised him as her son. And after the Buddha started teaching, he did kind of come back and say, hey, I'm okay. But he picked up his family, and Mahapajapati was the first woman to shave her head and say, wow, this is cool, I wanna be a disciple. And the Buddha said, no. I think his karma was a little strong on that one. He said, no, it's not a good idea. And she said, okay, well, she did it three times. The third time, she had 500 other women, shaved heads, robes, walked, I don't know how many, hundreds of miles? I don't know if it's stated how many miles. They all walked to follow the Buddha to this next place and said, will you ordain me? And the Buddha said no. And it wasn't until his assistant, Ananda, said, you might want to think about this. And the Buddha finally said yes, but with some extra rules. And so I really believe that these extra rules were part of the reason why we don't hear a lot about oh, I don't even have it. Yeah, we do. What's going on? Because they had 8 special rules for nuns only. And yeah, I'm just going to read through these. I'll let you have your own experience about them. A nun, even of 100 years, shall respectfully greet, rise up in the presence of, bow down before, and perform all proper duties toward a monk ordained even a day. A nun is not to spend the rainy season in a district where there is no monk. Every half moon, so every 2 weeks, a nun is to await 2 things from the order of monks. A date of a ceremony, a confession ceremony, and the time the monks will come to give teachings. After the rains retreat, the nuns are to hold an inquiry about whether any faults have been committed before both sanghas, the monks and the nuns. A nun who has been guilty of a serious offense must undergo discipline before both sanghas, that of the monks and nuns. When a novice has trained for 2 years in the 6 precepts, she should seek ordination from both sanghas. A nun is not to revile or abuse a monk under any circumstance. An admonition of monks by nuns is forbidden. Admonitions of nuns by monks is not forbidden. So having some special rules is something that to me seems not beneficial to the Dharma, not beneficial to any kind of teaching, definitely not beneficial to the very people that are right in front of you. And I still think we feel these rules today, and it's been 2,500 years, for gosh sakes. And that's part of our karma. That's part of how we got here. So fast forward several hundred years, Zongxi is the first Chinese Zen ancestor that we have, a woman Zen ancestor. And she lived in about 550, roughly. She's a sister of a king and possibly the daughter of Emperor Wu. This is one of these things, you know, we don't have a lot of details. They weren't written down. So, and she's one of the 4 Dharma heirs of Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma was the Indian sage that came and transferred Buddhism to China, at least historically, or mythically. It could also be historic. And she's one of only 4 Dharma heirs. So Bodhidharma had 4 students, and she was one of them. And in the all 4 students came in front of Bodhidharma, and he said, "Express to me the teaching." And she said, "My understanding now is that it is like the joy of seeing the Buddha land. It is felt at the first glance, but not the second." So that's her experience and her expression of practice. The joy of seeing the Buddha land in the first glance, but not the second. There's a lot in there that I'm not going to unpack. Bodhidharma answered, "You have my flesh." Ooh, I like the flesh. Flesh is good. I feel stuff through that. But it was an expression that Bodhidharma said, "You get it." But he did not say, "You are the lineage." He chose a man. A little more recently, we have Kojima Kendo, and she's a figure that lived from 1898 up until just 1994. So very recent in some of our lifetimes. And she was a great leader of Zen women, and in Soto Zen, in Soto Shu, she fought for the rights of women to conduct ceremonies and be heads of temples and have full ordination and full transmission, to be teachers in their own right. I will say, and jump back a few hundred years, about 800 years, when Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen, said that there is no difference in awakening of women and men. None. He had women students. His students had women students. He didn't transmit the lineage to them, but he had women students. And at some point, that was overturned and lost. And so Kojima Kendo takes this up again and says, look, this is important. And I wanted to add a few things that I didn't write down. One is the sewing teachers that we have in the area, Rosemary and Tomoe Katagiri, were taught by Zenpo Haitian, who is in our chant. This is somebody that's in our chant that I know people who know them. And it's like, oh, you can kind of rub off the fame on you a little bit. But I do have a picture. And I don't have a picture to put on Zoom, but I'll try to get it up to the camera. So last year they had a sewing practice period, intense kind of sharing of sewing knowledge, among a lot of sewing teachers around the US. And in the 70s, Asian was tasked to come to the US to teach both Tomoe Katagiri and Blanche Hartman how to sew the robes, the okesa. And this is part of our, it's what we do here at the Zen Center, is we sew our own rakusus, we sew our own robes. And this is a great learning practice. This is a great teaching that's passed down, and it's something that we do. It's very cool. So the tall one is Blanche, and the shorter person is Zempo, and she's got a funny hat on. I think it's a funny hat. But there's, pictures of these people that we chant. It's just, that blows me away, and it's great. And then over here, I gotta show you a picture of Tomoe too, just because. And this one, I think, is on the website somewhere. She taught Rosemary how to sew. And so for those online, let's see, I don't know if we can see this very well. So that's Tomoe. And then I've got Blanche Hartman is the tall one, and Zenpo is the shorter one. And Tomoe is still with us, but Blanche passed away some years ago. And so did Zenpo. So there's all kinds of, these are the kind of famous people that we learn about. And I can only imagine how many other women that didn't write a poem that was found in some archive, that didn't found a temple and wasn't, or didn't have any students, but still had the entire heart of Zen practice. A lot of these women gave up positions of privilege, endured great hardship. And I think their teachings really touch everybody. There's a lot of poems in this book. And with the poems, this is Daughters of Emptiness. And in this, with the poems, sometimes there's a nice description of the person and a little bit of their life, if we do it. And these things, let's see if I can find one that I wanted to show you. I marked too many things in this book. I mean, I've got all dog ears. It's like, well, just read the book. Yiqui. Yiqui lived from 1625 to 1679. And Yiqui is often quoted here, at least. I've heard this a lot. But here she is mourning her teacher. So having lived this life, and she had a teacher that she was with for a long time, and her teacher dies. And in Zen, that's not such a bad thing, right? Your teacher's always with you, and there's emptiness and there's oneness, and there's all these concepts that we have, and actual felt experiences that we have that we're not disconnected from our teachers and from those who pass. And the person isn't there anymore. Her teacher's gone. So she says, after submitting myself to a rigorous training for several years, a midday dream shattered awake, tears not yet wiped away. Alas, why did I have to be separated from my teacher so soon? The family pine tree has grown still and knows no sorrow. Since when have spring and fall passed without me serving her? I find myself imitating the birds crying over the fallen branches. Broken-hearted, I listen as again and again they return my calls. Then silently, I shut the brushwood gate against the wind and rain. So she mourns. She teaches me to mourn, and that it's okay to have these feelings of loss and to have these feelings of pain, and that not everything is sin. I don't know about you, and I don't know about you today, but I've had a lot of feelings, and I've had a lot of not Zen moments. Didn't break anything though, so that's cool. That's a positive. But I did have a lot of inspiration from the teachers here, the women teachers here at Zen Center. I wouldn't be here without them. I wouldn't be here without their teachings and how showing me what compassion is like. And I also want to, as a person that gets to sit here and a person that has the karma of being who I am, I want to amplify these experiences and tell you that there are things out there that we need to learn and that we need to know and that we need to pick up and broadcast and carry on. And I tend to get extremely long-winded. What time is it? Okay. And I get preachy. So I guess one of the things that I want to talk about with the Dharma and teachings is that the Dharma doesn't matter who's teaching it. The Dharma is independent of teacher. The Dharma is independent of you and me, and it still includes you and me. But what do the teachers say? What are they saying beyond what they're saying? What are they living? Can we pause for a moment and really take a look at what is really happening when we sense opposition to an idea, a teaching, who is giving me the message, and really see what the heck is going on, and really pause and take a look and say, this is truth. Maybe this is not truth. But it doesn't matter what the source of that teaching is, because we're all just pointing at what we think might be helpful, what we think might be our expression of the Dharma. And whether it's a rock or a cat or an idea or whatever it is, all these things can be our teachers. And there's no difference. In that way, there's no difference to who wants to say something and enact something about what the Dharma is. I forgot to qualify all my statements by saying I am clumsy. And in my clumsiness, I might offend. And if I do offend, let me know. Let me know. I am learning. I am learning about my own habits and my own expression of my karma. And so as I talk about things that I know very little about, such as women's experience, I want to know when I'm sticking my foot in it. So we're about to open up discussion, and if you want immediate feedback, that's cool. If you want to tell me feedback some other time, that's cool too. I'm open to all of that stuff. So I had some more things prepared and I had some things to do. I see the time is getting a little long and I'm getting a little, my brain is getting a little scattered about those things. So I think right now I will just thank you for your attention and open up for discussion and comments. And I can, after the talk, I'll leave these books out if anybody wants to come by. And I'm sorry for those that are online. I don't have a list of these for you. But if you stick around, I'll read them to you if you want.
Jeromy, I appreciate your talk tonight. I appreciate hearing stories about the women ancestors that I haven't heard before.
You used the word karma quite a few times tonight, and I think, you turn on the news and you see how the world is enmeshed in the karma from our past, and certainly not just in Zen, but most religions around the world, how women have been dismissed. Politics, the brash male energy, of world leaders, and we can certainly benefit from women's approach to all subject matter, but life. But I just thought, yeah, there's a lot of karma being expressed right now from from the past, and talks like this are wonderful, and we need more of them. And I appreciate that you did this talk tonight.
Thanks, Jeff. If you're online and want to say something, you can just unmute and speak up.
Well, I'd like to say something. Thank you, Jeromy, for this talk. And, it seems to parallel, my experience with racism. And once I started to kind of go into this racism with some curiosity and accepting my location of when I grew up, what society, I grew up in a white society, and looking at that, some things kind of opened up, and I would think too on looking at women's experiences as well, that I think things kind of open up. It sounds like you're kind of attempting to take on that journey and showing up to be curious about all this and being vulnerable about talking about this subject. And I know from you just looked at that book not too long ago, Ben Connolly at Daughters of Emptiness, and it's really got some really awesome stuff in there. And I think one of the people that they do kind of point to is Audre Lorde. Lorde, am I saying that right?
Lord, yeah.
Yeah, in her book, Sisters Outsiders. And she writes this whole chapter on erotica and how it was taken over by the West and sort of used as a power thing against women. And as a result, I think both men and women lose out by this, taking this power, the spiritual power, not so much of the senses around erotica, but the spiritual senses around that, and then using that as a power thing to keep one group down, oppressed. So, yeah, I think there's just a lot here that you're starting to point to follow and have an experience in that. And I certainly want to continue on this path as well. So thank you for bringing that here into a Dharma talk. That's really nice. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeromy, for your thoughtfulness on this topic. And I too think it's really interesting that how you kept using karma and just I think of, you know, how it maybe has affected all of us to not have as many women influencing and our understanding of karma and being some of this. And it's hard to even articulate.
Yeah, it feels big, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've never thought about it, but it makes I feel percolating and feeling that. Thank you for that.
Jeromy, I'm curious too, this is not the subject of the talk you gave tonight, but I'd be curious maybe for a future talk if there are, and maybe there aren't, but I'm curious about stories of ancestors or teachings from a perspective of people who maybe didn't fit into the category of woman or the category of man, or maybe complicated that idea. I'm wondering if that's in the tradition, and if it is, I'm curious to hear those stories too.
Right. I don't know off the top of my head, but deserves investigation for sure. There are stories about, because Buddhism says that in order to be enlightened, you need to be a man, women would turn into men to be enlightened and then turn back into women once they've been enlightened. So there are those kinds of stories, but not what you're talking about. And so I would imagine that there were quite a number. I mean, every culture has its non-gendered, transgendered, both gendered people, population. And so not to have that in China or Japan seems really, not to have heard about it seems odd, actually.
I think even, I don't know the stories nearly as well as you do. I'm curious, I think even those stories about, or, the mythological, women turning into men and then back into women for the sake of receiving whatever, that, I think that might be those might be rich texts for.
Yeah, they sure are, yeah. Okay.
I'm trying to think of there are a couple iconic figures and they're represented in statues where they're sometimes shown as male and sometimes as female. I can't.
Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva is one of them, right?
Yep.
Initially a man, but could be a woman, and would appear as what was needed to appear, right? So if that's a skillful means thing. So if you needed to be an old lady, you'd be an old lady. If you needed to be a boy, you'd be a boy. But then also evolved into figures like Kannon or Kanzeon, the Bodhisattva of compassion, and lots of figures of her around, especially Japan. Anything else? All right, I will move on to some announcements.